top target when it comes to the list of 100. You can get that complete list on CBSSports.com. But taking a look at the top 5, right behind Armstead, you find Von Miller, who now has 2 rings, one with Denver, of course, and the latest there with the Rams. He's on the other side of 30, but still has something left in the tank. J.C. Jackson coming off a Pro Bowl season, 8 interceptions this past season up there in New England. And Chandler Jones, who also flashed a little bit early in the season in Arizona, followed by Carlton Davis, rounding out that top 5. For more on this, let's bring in Pete Prisco and the champ Brian McFadden to break down that top 100. And Pete, let's start there because it is your list with number 1 at Armstead.
Yeah, and when he's on the field, he's one of the best left tackles in the league. The problem has been he hasn't been on the field. He only played 9 games last year. He's missed a lot of time over the course of his career. But at 31, he can still play and still protect the blind side. And I go back to Trent Williams. When Trent Williams went to San Francisco, he had sat out some time with Washington in a contract dispute, but also because he had some issues with his medicals, and he's been the best left tackle in the league at his advanced age. So I think for a team out there looking for a guy who can plug and play and be a real good protector of the blind side of a right-handed quarterback, I think Terron Armstead would make a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned Trent Williams. I think he is the best tackle in the game, but when Armstead is healthy, you know, he could be 1B when you look at Trent Williams and what he's been able to do in his professional career, especially most recently there in San Francisco. And I envision the same thing happening for Armstead. I think he will go elsewhere because, yes, you may have concerns with the medical, you may have concerns with his durability, but you still need to roll the dice if you're trying to shore up the left side of your offensive line, especially if you have an up-and-coming quarterback a la Cincinnati, and they need to improve that element of their ball game. So me personally, I agree with Pete Prisco. Having Armstead number 1, that's the only option I think you can have when it comes to all the free agents that will be available during free agency. You have to start this conversation with Armstead.
All right, you can't go wrong with a 3-time Pro Bowler there. That is the case for Armstead. How about Von Miller, Pete? 32, but can still get after the QB when it comes to playing on that side of the ball.
Yeah, and I don't think he's going to get a mega deal, but I think he's going to get a good 3-year deal. And he proved down the stretch for the Rams that he can still be an effective edge rusher. On through the playoffs, in his final couple games with the Rams, he was back to being Von Miller again. So there's a commodity out there. There's a want for him, too. I mean, this is a guy who can rush the passer, can turn the ball over, and so many teams, as we know, are in need of major edge rushers. I would imagine he's going to go to a team that could contend, try and win it again. I wouldn't be shocked if he went back to the Rams if they can figure out a way to fit him in under the cap. But he's a wanted commodity because he can knock the ball out of a quarterback's hands and he can put him on the ground.
Sacking quarterbacks is a must in the National Football League. Putting pressure on opposing quarterbacks is a must as well. And I had my reservations with Von being number 2 on your list, but we know how important it is when you can sack quarterbacks. So, of course, being 32, having him above J.C. Jackson, who's a bit younger, who's been a ball-hawking corner throughout his career in New England, could easily be a toss-up for me. But if you have Von Miller here, I'm okay with that, and here's why. Postseason play, when it meant the most, he stood up and he showed out. 4 sacks in the playoffs. You saw what he did in that Super Bowl against Joe Burrow in Cincinnati. Because of what he did in the postseason, he will get paid. I don't expect to see him leave the Rams. When you give up the capital that they gave up to get Von Miller, I felt like they knew they would find a way to keep him in a Los Angeles Rams uniform for more than a half a year. So I think he will stay put. And it's only right that he stays put when you look at what he and Aaron Donald was able to accomplish together in the postseason. So me personally, I think he stays right there in Los Angeles with the Rams.
One of those leaders in the trenches here for the Rams, the reason why they have a ring coming their way out in L.A. Pete, J.C. Jackson on the back end, one of those stars at 26 when it comes to the DBs.
Yeah, and he's a guy that can lock down in man coverage. You know, the Patriots play a lot of man, and he's outstanding at it. He's had his moments where, you know, a guy like Diggs ate him alive in one of those games with the Bills this year, but you're going to get beat when you play man coverage, and he's good at it. The right age, I always say, the right age for free agents is 26, 27, is sending players, and so for that reason, he's going to get a big deal. Keep an eye on Miami. There's some talk that the Dolphins will make a little bit of a run at him. You know, Byron Jones recently had surgery. He's also got a big cap number. And, you know, Xavier Howard wants a new contract every other Tuesday. So keep an eye on J.C. Jackson as a possibility for the Dolphins.
Man, J.C. Jackson, when it comes to intercepting passes, he's been the best to do it, especially over the last 2 seasons. 17, graphic right there on time. 17 interceptions in the past 2 seasons. This is a guy who was a late-round selection. He came and he earned his keeps in New England, became one of the best cornerbacks, and because of his development, they were able to move on from Stephon Gilmore. So I'm surprised to see the Patriots decline in putting the tag on JC to be able to negotiate and not worry about other suitors. But with them not giving him the franchise tag, he's open. He's open. And if I'm the New York Jets, I try my best to go sign JC Jackson. I don't know exactly where they're located when it comes to cap space, but they need to improve their secondary in a fast way. Being able to get a guy like J.C. Jackson instantly improves the secondary for the Jets, and you pluck one of the best defenders from a divisional foe in the New England Patriots.
Jackson has a chance to cash in there based on those numbers we saw this past season. Another guy that was kind of hoping to cash in, Chandler Jones. He flashed in the opener, Pete, with those 5 sacks. Age might be a problem here, but you have him at 4.
And again, here's a guy who can put his hand on the ground, can stand up, can rush the passer, and there is great value for those guys. You mentioned it. He had the 5 sacks in the opener. It looked like he was on his way to having a record-breaking season. It kind of leveled off a little bit, and I think that's something to keep an eye on because he is 32. But again, I go back to what I said earlier about the pass rushers when we were talking about Von Miller. There is such a want and a need for these guys that they're going to get paid, and he will get paid on this market. He can still influence the quarterback and be a guy who can knock him down consistently. So Chandler Jones is going to get a big money deal.
Yeah, either 2-year deal, 3-year deal, but he's deserving of that. He's a guy that's always close to that double-digit number when it comes to sacks, especially when he's healthy. When he's healthy, book it. It's a guarantee he's getting at least 10 sacks that year. I don't think he will go back to Arizona, but if he's able to look out and see what's available, what about the Chargers? Could you imagine Chandler Jones and Bosa playing alongside each other? We see outstanding duos of pass rushers torment and harass opposing offenses, but just imagine that lineup with Chandler Jones and Bosa. What about the Patriots? We know the Patriots don't mind bringing a familiar face back home. They need to improve their defense as well. Pair Chandler Jones up with Matt Judon. Now you got a nice duo of pass rushers as well, but you better believe he will find a home sooner than later.
We'll find out what happens with Chandler Jones there. Carlton Davis, 25. If you can't get your hands on J.C. Jackson, Pete, that is definitely an option there if you're looking for somebody to cover that number 1 receiver on the opposing teams.
Yeah, and the Bucs would have loved to keep him, and they still might. They're going to do everything they can to keep him. But, you know, by tagging Chris Godwin, they couldn't do it on Carlton Davis, and that's going to get him hit the market. And I think he's an outstanding corner. I mean, he's had his moments as well when he gets beaten man coverage. He was banged up last year, obviously. That hurt their defense. But at 25, a long, athletic corner who can play press man and can really lock down the guy when he's asked to do so. I think there's great value in that. I love Carlton Davis, and in fact, you know, I wouldn't be so sure that I wouldn't take Carlton Davis over J.C. Jackson. I know that sounds crazy, but if the money was a little bit less for Carlton Davis and a little bit more for J.C. Jackson, I think I'd take Carlton Davis.
And if the money is the same, I think you take J.C. just from the ability to pick off passes. That's impressive. But if you're talking about playing straight man-to-man in your face for 4 quarters, that is who Carlton Davis is. And I don't think he goes back to Tampa. If they lose out on him, that's a huge loss when it comes to the secondary play, especially at the cornerback position. He's going to command a lot of money. Will he get that J.C. Jackson type deal? I don't know because the interceptions are not there, but he's more than a serviceable player. And there are a lot of teams that would love to add Carlton Davis to what to their team, especially in their division. Think about the NFC South. We could see some openings at the cornerback positions in the NFC South. If he leaves Tampa, I wouldn't be surprised to see him go to an NFC South divisional foe to go against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers twice a year. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
All right, we'll see what happens. Again, he's 25, so as Pete, like you like to say, he's right when it comes to that age if you're trying to lay down some money for some of those big names Looking at the rest of the top 10 outside of that 5, we already broke those down. Brandon Sheriff checking it at 6. How about Allen Robinson, one of those possible number 1 wide receivers in an offense? We saw what he did in Chicago. Had a few 1,000-yard receiving years that couple seasons there. And then in Dallas, Randy Gregory coming off maybe his best time in Dallas this past season. Part of that defense there with Dan Quinn and others checking in as other options if you can't get your hands on those top 5s. And let's start right there at number 6 there, Pete, with Brandon Sheriff. Interior lineman might be available for some teams.
Well, I think he is going to be available for some teams because I don't think the Washington's going to bring him back. The price is too much. They feel like they have some young players that can step in and replace him. So he will hit the market, and I think he's going to be a guy that teams that need interior power players will look at. And you know, BMAC mentioned the Bengals as a possibility for Armstead. If they did sign Armstead, they'd have to move Jonah Williams to right tackle, which means Riley Reif wouldn't be back. But they also need to get better on the interior. I mean, let's face it, the interior of the offensive line was the biggest part of the problem. The center isn't very good. The right guard was awful, and the left guard is an unrestricted free agent. So they need to get better on the interior. I think Sheriff would be a possibility for them if they really want to open the purse strings up and go get themselves an elite guard.
All right, see how that pans out there. B-Mac, how about a former Defensive Player of the Year checking in on 15 in Pete's list, and Stephon Gilmore? Veteran, a guy that used to be a lockdown quarter, still has some value. Your thoughts on him?
Stephon Gilmore. I mean, when you look at Stephon Gilmore, granted, he's not the same player that he was 2 or 3 years ago, but he's still a number 1 corner. And I do believe he will sign a nice deal, maybe around the 2-year mark. When you look at teams that definitely need a guy like Stephon Gilmore, the first team I like to highlight is the Kansas City Chiefs. Their secondary has been inconsistent, up and down. And you look at in their division, adding Russell Wilson to pair up with some of the wide receivers that they will see in that division twice a year, it's imperative for the Kansas City Chiefs to improve the cornerback. Not to mention, they may lose a few guys as well in the secondary that have been there over the last few seasons. So Stephon Gilmore and Kansas City, I think that would be a match made in heaven. If not Kansas City, why don't you look right down the road to the Raiders? They need to add some depth at the cornerback position as well. Not knowing if they will bring back Casey Hayward, he potentially could go elsewhere to see some nice money. You need to find a way to fill the shoes that will be left by Casey Hayward if he signs elsewhere. So those are 2 teams I think definitely should have Stephon Gilmore high on the list, the Chiefs and the Raiders.
All right, Gilmore, the 3rd best, as you see there among free agent corners. Jadeveon Clowney, Pete, back in free agency once again. You have him checking in at 26.
And, you know, he actually had a really good season last year. Look, he's never going to be the guy that people draft, that the Texans drafted him to be, which was put your hand on the ground and go up the field and get me 17 sacks. That's just not who he is. He's a good, tough, physical run player on defense, which a lot of defensive ends aren't. But he also had 9 sacks last year, and some of that came because he played opposite Myles Garrett. We know that. But he's a good, tough football player. He's just not an elite pass rusher. But pair him up with somebody, I think he's the kind of guy that can get you 7, 8, 9 sacks and be a good run player. So there's going to be some value for him as well on this market.
All right, you see him right there checking in at 26. 5 spots below this, which you don't see at 31. Odell Beckham Jr. at 31 there, B-Mac. You know, he has to deal with that torn ACL. We saw that in the Super Bowl. But how much value will he have in this market based on what we've seen from him so far?
Brandon, I mean, if OBJ was healthy throughout the entire season, if you look at how he started the Super Bowl, he would be hot on the market. But because of that ACL injury, his name won't be as hot. And I do believe he will go back to the Rams. I think that's the best situation for him, for both parties. They know him. He knows them. He feels comfortable in that offense, especially when you look at the quarterback in Matthew Stafford, not knowing exactly when he will be cleared to return to football activities, definitely will push a lot of teams away from trying to land his services. But OBJ, man, unfortunately, the injury happened at the wrong time for him. But I think he will find a way to be right back in the Rams uniform. And at some point in time in this upcoming season, he will be able to showcase the ability that he showed, especially during the Super Bowl before the injury.
And he does return out to L.A., as you mentioned there. Pete, the Chiefs defense, they have a few holes they might have to fill because you look at some of their secondary as well up front. They have Tyrann Mathieu at 20 on your list, Javarius Ward at 22, and Melvin Ingram at 33. Chances they can retain any of these or maybe fill those voids based on what we're seeing here in your top 100.
Yeah, I think they'd like to be able to keep all of them because Ward played great last year for him, and it was a big physical corner who's going to have a market. And you know what? When they got them, we know Honey Badger can do so many different things on the back end. But Melvin Ingram, when he came over, actually really helped solidify the defense. And that sounds crazy, but it allowed them to move Chris Jones back inside where he needed to be. And he is a tough. You talk about a tough player who plays the run. He's not a great edge rusher anymore either, but he's a good, tough, physical football player, and people like that. And he helped that defense a great deal. So ideally, they'd like to bring them all back. They won't be able to. If I had my pick, I'd bring Honey Badger back because I think he's the best player of the group, but they're going to have a tough time bringing any of them back.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think if you had to look at the priority list for the Chiefs when it comes to those three defensive names, it starts and stops with the Honey Badger. We saw how much he meant to their team, their defense, when he was out, when he missed that ball game because of that concussion. They had no way of stopping the offense. They looked confused. He is the communicator. He is the ultimate traffic cop in the secondary. He lines people up. He understands that he dissects offenses pre-snap as best as any safety in the game. And you talked about the interceptions, not to mention the energy that he provides. So if I'm Kansas City, that's the one guy I have to bring back. You do not want to allow him to go off and play elsewhere. And then Melvin Ingram, because as you mentioned, Pete, when he got to Kansas City, the defense played better. They did a better job in collapsing the pocket. You was able to kick Chris Jones back inside where he plays some of his best football in the interior, not to mention what Melvin Ingram provided when it came to experience as well. So those will be the top two names. I think Ward will go elsewhere because he will command some nice money. But if I'm Kansas City, I start my free agent moves defensively with Tyrann Mathieu, being able to bring him back, and then let's go get Ingram.
Honey Badger there had All-Pro selections 3. Also on that list, the co-host of the All Things Cover pod, Patrick Peterson. I want you to be gentle here, B-Mac. He's sitting at 43 on Pete's list. Your thoughts on this?
Well, you know, usually I'm ready to jump on Pete's back when it comes to his list, but I'm okay with this number for Pat P. Pat got injured. He missed a lot of time because of that hamstring, and then when he finally bounced back, he didn't blow you away with his numbers, but if you watch the tape, he didn't get a lot of targets, but when he did, he stood up and played pretty good football. Pat P still wants to play. He believes he can play another 3 or 4 or 5 years. He's still young, still in good shape, as you can see from the healthy film that he was able to put out there. So I'm okay in having Pat at 43. You better believe this will be a motivational for Pat P as he gets ready for this season. But one thing I can say, if I'm Minnesota, I understand they may target a corner in the first round, but you still need to bring back Pat P. Depth is an issue for them when it comes to secondary play, and clearly when you look at Aaron Rodgers returning to Green Bay, when Devontae Adams is returning back to the Packers as well, you need to have that guy who you believe is a number 1 corner, and Pat P is still the number 1 corner. If not the Vikings, what about my former team, Pete Prisco? What about the Pittsburgh Steelers? We don't know exactly what will happen with Joe Hayden, but it's safe to say I think Joe Hayden will be playing elsewhere. And if you look at the cornerback position for Pittsburgh, they don't have any notable guys there. And I think if you can go get a guy like Pat P and then add some youth as well, you instantly improve the cornerback position. So Pittsburgh might not be a team that people are tagging to Pat P, but I think that could be a nice fit if Minnesota declines in trying to bring him back.
Yeah, but I don't think Pat P wants to follow in his cousin's footsteps. Give me a break with that, B-Mac. You don't want to go to Pittsburgh. He's gonna go. I think the best scenario for him, is, like you mentioned, is to go back to Minnesota, play for the Vikings because they need corner help. And you're right. He missed time with the hamstring injury last year. He also missed time for COVID. Remember? And so I don't think he, until late in the season, he didn't look really comfortable. He started playing like Pat P. I think he needs to go back. And by the way, if we put him on the lie detector and said, "Hey, are you okay where you are at 43?" He'd say, if he said no, that thing would go beep, 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 because he'll take 43.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.